It is universal and ageless. A man's desire for adventure, fortune, and power. There has been no place more open to such ideals than a frontier, and, in the 19th century, Asia found itself the frontier of the West. No nation was more filled with possibility than China, a decaying empire at the mercy of European powers. The Qing dynasty was a nation rife with chaos and conflict, but Westerners saw it only as an uncharted land, an empty area upon the map of the world. An uncharted, unexploited, and unconquered land. One any man could conquer. All he needed was weapons, men, and strategy. These adventurers were known as filibusters, bringing both Western technology and warfare to the far corners of the globe, in hopes of either assisting or exploiting these lands, be it for price, prestige, or power. One man came to China to establish his own force among its chaos, his own victory. An army that would survive him. It would survive nearly all its three commanders. Three characters as strange as the situations they faced and created. The 1800s found China a nation of discord. Divided by famine, ineffectual government, and ethnic conflict, the massive empire faced breakdown. A position only worsened by conflict between the ethnic Manchu rulers and the native Chinese populace. While the empire stagnated, its wealth did not. Something Western powers would exploit for wealth through the trade of silk and tea, demanding concession upon concession after inflicting a series of humiliating defeats upon the isolationist state, eventually forcing the Qing themselves to open their own ports. Disaster would lead to disaster. A massive rebellion shook the empire in 1850. Called the Taiping Rebellion, it was an uprising of religious radicals and anti-Manchu Chinese, united by Hong Jiquan, who deemed himself the brother of Jesus Christ. He had come to expunge the Manchu devils from China, the Taiping's only explicit goal being the overthrow of the Manchu Qing dynasty. A possibility Western powers feared would destroy China, inciting a possible scramble for territory on the Chinese mainland, but total collapse never materialized. Instead, only conflict on an unprecedented scale. Even through the destruction, though, players who could exploit the circumstances rose to make a profit, or those whom, for their own motives, desired more than just a cheap buck. In 1860, at the midst of the Taiping Rebellion, a lone American arrived in Shanghai. His travels had taken him from Crimea to China, and everywhere in between, but Frederick Townsend Ward was an American from Salem, Massachusetts, where he had grown up in a sailing family, a family that had a hand in Salem's very lucrative old China trade. Ward had never graduated high school. He had been educated in warfare and sailing through his life and travels. Ward also had more special experience for his situation. 7 years prior, Ward had joined another famous filibuster in an invasion of Mexico, and later he had journeyed to Europe to join the Crimean War. Both exploits were failures, as Ward often refused to follow orders. Yet both experiences and his genial personality had helped him survive through both misadventures. Ward's rough seafaring uprising had made him a survivor. In China, he was only a 28-year-old foreigner, but a 28-year-old foreigner with a resume and experience. Shanghai was a trade port the Qing had ceded to foreign empires. Ward founded a wealthy city fearing invasion by foreigners. It was also a city in a foreign nation lacking an army. Despite being dominated by both Chinese and Europeans, a corrupt clique of merchants had made protection an afterthought, until a Taiping-associated uprising had threatened the city 6 years earlier. A ragtag militia of local volunteers had barely saved the merchants and their profits. Except now, the horde of the Taiping loomed upon the city. The lead Chinese merchant, Yang Feng, hired Ward to assemble a Shanghai Foreign Corps, ran by Westerners, employing Westerners, armed by Westerners, under Qing employment. A commission Ward accepted to lead his self-styled Ward Corps. Pickings were less than slim. All Western soldiers Ward could find in Shanghai were European renegades, mostly drunkards and exiles who were less than loyal, due to the often late or non-existent pay of the Foreign Corps. Composed of British, French, Italians, and a few Americans and Irish, the Foreign Corps was not successful on the battlefield, despite Ward's experience from his positions and drilling of the ragamuffin runaways. While at a technological advantage, The foreign corps suffered poor cohesion and had barely more than 500 members. Western powers also considered the corps in violation of their neutrality laws in the Taiping Rebellion, which resulted in Ward being captured by the British, escaping from a prison ship by jumping into the sea, and returning to Shanghai to renounce his American citizenship, making him a Chinese citizen, putting both Ward and his shiftless army above international law. As the Qing and Chinese merchants refused to pay Ward, the foreign corps began to sell off their own weaponry and uniforms, usually to purchase more alcohol. No matter how good his commander drilling, Ward was left with poor material to command. Instead, Ward turned towards recruiting Filipino mercenaries and native Chinese. Ward hoped to staff a more loyal fighting force, with locals trained in Western style, with Western arms, in Western tactics, as the Taiping feared the supposed supremacy of European armies. Through this, Ward introduced both Western technology and early psychological warfare to the then rather xenophobic Chinese state. In hopes of attracting Chinese recruits, the Qing rechristened the Shanghai Foreign Corps as the Chang Shangshul, or, in English, the Ever-Victorious Army, in some translations, hoping to inspire power in Ward's army despite Qing distrust of him, though Ward's command of this reformed force was rather brief. Well bolstered to nearly 5,000 troops with several gunships, the force still relied on surprise, technological supremacy, and siege tactics. Ward suffered a shot to the abdomen during one such siege at Ningbo, inflicted by a Taiping troop. He would die on September 22, 1862, only 30 years old. Ward had desired a loyal Filipino lieutenant named Vincent Macanya to succeed him. Imperial interference would ruin his will. The Qing appointed a less than reputable commander named Henry Andres Bergevine, hoping a Westerner would better lead the force and not be loyal to the dead Ward. Bergevine proved himself a less than wise pick. Son of a Napoleonic soldier, Bergevine was Ward's fellow American from North Carolina. An infamous drunkard, Bergevine had also come to China seeking a position and a fortune. Unlike Ward, Bergevine was far more reckless and immoral. He immediately betrayed the Qing after his appointment, claiming he had inherited the money owed to Ward and the ever-victorious army's overdue pay. Bergevine broke into the Chinese merchant Yang Feng's house and attempted to extort 140,000 taels from him and the Qing court. In response, the Qing put a 50,000 tael bounty on Bergevine's head. Mostly bark, Bergevine fled to the US ambassador, attempted to bribe him to support a new foreign corps, which failed. Bergevine tried to retake control of the ever-victorious army, which also failed. He did convince 70 mercenaries to steal a gunboat with him and flee to the Taiping, which, guess what, also failed. As the ship exploded, Bergevine also spent the money on whiskey and attempted to shoot his own troops afterwards, as they had told him he was a drunkard. Beyond his last resort, Bergevine attempted to convince the ever-victorious army's new British commander to join him in overthrowing the Qing. After the meeting, he was quickly arrested as he refused amnesty by the British government. Exiled from China, Bergevine was told never to return, which he obviously refused. Bergevine was arrested once more by Qing police attempting to sneak back into China, hoping to create a new militia. Though he had plans for more escapades, Bergevine died in 1865, as the boat he was being transported on capsized with no explanation. The mysterious circumstances were never explained, or even examined. His death was at least a thorn out of the side of the Qing and the British, who had decided to cooperate due to Bergevine's adventures. The Qing hoped a British officer would be a safer choice, and the British hoping to exert some influence over Shanghai and Chinese politics, reaching a compromise over the controversial military unit. A British officer by the name of John Holland was appointed, his only qualification being British and a dislike of Americans. His only remarkable activity was being forgettable, and his command was brief, being competent simply by the fact he did not cause a string of diplomatic incidents. Eventually, a decorated British officer by the name of Charles George Gordon was appointed. Born in London, England, to a military family, Gordon was an odd fellow, though not unknown in the British military at the time. Gordon was very much a Lawrence of Arabia figure, whose life was dedicated to the military and to the empire, until his untimely death some 25 years after his experience in China in Africa. Gordon was a stirred and charitable man, known for his faith and dedication. While never married, Gordon's only major relations through his life were his sister and the military. Rumors often claiming he was homo or asexual, only traits that made Gordon a distant but principled man, perfect for such a position in China. Gordon was responsible for drilling the army back into shape after Bergevine's disastrous command. He also applied stricter regulations, regulating drug use and drinking, applying a British moral code to his force. Gordon also standardized the uniform of the ever-victorious army, turning it into a well-oiled machine. Though far stricter, Gordon had a much better business acumen and the British Empire behind him, meaning he could better press the Qing for payment. Refusing their recommendations, he allowed his soldiers to loot instead, a thought that horrified the noble Gordon, something that put him up against other Chinese commanders, whose troops were often far less regulated, and openly displayed disdain for Gordon's Western tactics and his British nationality. Issues that finally exploded when the Taiping Rebellion reached its end in 1864. Gordon, as part of British demands, demanded amnesty and proper trial for all Taiping commanders. The Qing briefly agreed, but backtracked, executing nearly all high-ranking Taiping behind Gordon's back and slaughtering entire cities of innocent Taiping citizens. Gordon was so disgusted he resigned in reaction, addressing his grievances to both Chinese commanders and the Qing court itself. As protest, Gordon refused all reward and payment for his duties both from the British and the Chinese. He spoke openly to the press about the brutality of the war and the atrocities committed by the Qing, which China would take decades to fully recover from. All opinions Gordon held until his death, never remarking favorably upon his time in China. Gordon would continue on to his own future fame, though. The ever-victorious army was dissolved with his resignation, as its goal had been met. So too did Ward, and Bergevine fade into obscurity with it, with Bergevine's misdeeds lost to time, and Gordon's own story absorbing Ward's success. The army was disbanded to the darkness of history. How successful was such a force? The ever-victorious army remains an odd footnote of history. It had little impact on both the rebellion and China. China would not fully embrace modernization until the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912. While Ward introduced Western warfare, anti-Western sentiment dominated the Qing court. Only time would change that, and the ever-victorious army was a product of its commanders, not of the empire. Outsiders to China were never fully accepted. Gordon is given nearly all credit for the army's successes, while Ward remains forgotten, and Bergevine was, well, still, after his death, Ward retained some fame in China, his resting place. Due to the unit's controversial history, Ward's success was absorbed by the more remembered Gordon. Who would you better remember? The ragtag American with a chip on his shoulder for ambitions wider than the world, or the proper genteel British gentleman, soldier of national duty? Each man had their own victories, but the army found no grand reception, only the shadowy, little-remarked archives of history.